on thin ice here. He refers to Geneva a number of times in the social contract, and in glowing terms, but the Geneva he now refers to is the Geneva established more than 2 centuries earlier by Calvin. The reality Rousseau had experienced during his return visit in 1754 had evidently proved something of a disappointment. At one point he even goes so far as to describe contemporary Geneva as a dictatorship run by 25 despots. The ideal state of Geneva now had to be viewed through the rosy spectacles of history, a history that Rousseau and his accompanying nurse would have been lucky to survive. During this earlier period, fornication was punished by death. Despite such historical oversights, Rousseau's analysis is instructive. He goes on to explain how a just society cannot be created by force, in much the same way that physical inequalities are no excuse for social inequalities. Imposed rights do not create genuine rights. When force creates rights, those rights are as fleeting as the force itself. As one force deposes another, one set of rights will give way to another. This leads to the state where might is right. Those who subscribe to this seductive slogan in order to impose their ideas merely render such ideas ephemeral. The Nazis, who were great believers in might is right, should thus have seen their total defeat in 1945 as the ultimate disproof of all they had ever stood for. In order to establish a proper government, the consent of all the people was required. Only in this way could all its citizens have moral equality. The citizen finds liberty by submitting to the law he has imposed upon himself for the good of all. But there is a difficulty in Rousseau's description of how the just society is put together. The individual is free because he submits only to his own will. In a society there are many wills. Owing to the variety of human nature, these wills inevitably differ and thus conflict. In this event, some individuals are forced to submit to a will that conflicts with their own. Rousseau attempted to overcome this difficulty by introducing the concept of the general will. Human society was itself viewed as a collective individual, which retained its collective liberty because it subscribed to its own general will. The general will applied to all because it derived from all. This ensured both liberty and equality, as well as fostering a spirit of fraternity. The liberty, equality, fraternity of the modern French Republic's national motto derives directly from these ideas. Here Rousseau agreed with Hobbes, who decreed that in the social contract the individual surrenders all his rights to the community. In exchange for laying down his natural rights, the citizen receives civil rights. This benefits all individuals. Outside society, the individual's rights depended upon his individual power. Within society, his rights were enforced by the power of the community, the rule of law. But here we come up against a central difficulty. In Rousseau's words, if there are opposing voices at the time when the social contract is made, this opposition does not invalidate the contract. It merely excludes these dissidents. They are foreigners among the citizens. After the state is instituted, residence within it implies consent. To live within the state requires submission to the sovereign. If an individual within a society refuses to obey the general will, he should be constrained to do so. Those who do not submit to the freedom of the sovereign general will should be forced to be free. These are ominous words. In the great collective societies of the 20th century, they would take on a clear meaning of their own. Both communism and Nazism excluded their dissidents and stigmatized foreigners among the citizens. Such notions derive directly from Rousseau's social contract, but their application was disingenuous. Rousseau would certainly not have subscribed to any dictatorship of the proletariat, Marx's prescription for how a society would be forced to be free. Nowhere does Rousseau state that an entire society should be forced to be free. He is referring to individuals who resist the general will. Even so, this idea still grates with modern notions of liberalism and pluralism. In the social contract, Rousseau abandons the earlier idea of liberty that he delineated in the Discourse on Inequality. Originally, in their natural state, human beings had been free. Now he stresses how natural human beings are not so free at all. They are slaves of their animal passions, and their strength is limited by their natural inequality. Society gives natural human beings a liberty from their enslaving natural passions, as well as a moral equality. A liberty, equality, and fraternity. Although the French lay great claim to rationality, here reason flies out the window. Liberty and equality are in fact incompatible. If people are given liberty, they inevitably develop inequalities. Some work hard to accumulate a fortune, others prefer to seek fulfillment in the pursuit of power or indolence. Likewise, if people are forced to be equal, their liberty to become unequal must be curtailed. The ideas of freedom and equality, such as prevail in a modern liberal democracy, are necessarily selective. We are equal before the law. We are at liberty to pursue our different aims. We should have equality of opportunity, but we should be free to follow the opportunity of our choice. Rousseau, too, was aware of these difficulties. He may no longer have viewed society as fatal, but he remained aware of its ability to damage our humanity. Although the foundation of the social contract is property, and this should be protected, it should not be at all costs. Riches bring power, but power should never be great enough for its owner to exercise violence. He specifically states that, in respect of riches, no citizen shall ever be wealthy enough to buy another, nor be poor enough to be forced to sell himself. The state should allow neither rich men nor beggars. He insists, these two estates, which are naturally inseparable, are equally fatal to the common good. From the one come the friends of tyranny, and from the other, tyrants. He realizes that the force of circumstance tends to destroy equality, whereas the force of legislation ought always to tend toward preserving it. Rousseau distinguished between two types of law. The actual law, such as is outlined in the Discourse on Inequality, simply preserved society as it was with all its injustices. True law, on the other hand, derived from the will of all the people and ensured justice for all. No intelligent people would ever agree to formulate laws against themselves. But there was a decided problem here. Rousseau found himself forced to concede that most people were not intelligent. The general will might have had the moral backing of the people, but it did not necessarily operate for their own good. People were not always capable of seeing the implications of what they willed. Rousseau was one of the first liberal thinkers to accept this problem, which remains a persistent difficulty in all enlightened social argument. Even the most liberal commentators are forced to concede that mass behavior must frequently be judged and legislated for according to its lowest common denominator. And as fellow participants in this behavior, we all know that this can be very low and very common indeed. Rousseau's solution was simple. People were better off when they were ruled by a good leader, who was sufficiently skilled to draw up a just constitution and system of laws so that no mistakes were made. Here Rousseau was ruthlessly pragmatic, even Machiavellian. If necessary, a leader should be willing to suggest that his ideas were the result of divine inspiration, in order to give his rules sufficient force in the public eye. Rousseau was convinced that a good republican government required the backing of religion. Christianity, however, was no use for such purpose. This religion may have preached brotherly love, but in the main its virtues were directed towards spiritual values. It was concerned with getting people into the next world, the kingdom of heaven, not with telling them how to make a success of their lives in an earthly republic, or even how to make the republic itself a success. Christianity was worse than useless here. What was needed was a civil religion which encouraged civil virtues such as courage and patriotism. Such virtues brought success to the citizen and at the same time brought benefit to the state. Here Rousseau was articulating a growing European realization, though one that remained necessarily covert, as it directly contravened Christian orthodoxy and the teaching of the Church. The ideas upon which Rousseau drew in this instance had been set down most explicitly by the Dutch thinker Bernard Mandeville, who in 1714 had written The Fable of the Bees. In this, Mandeville pointed out that the virtues required by public life were precisely the opposite of the private behavior required by Christianity. What Christianity condemned as vices were the very virtues that drove civil life: greed, self-interest, ambition, and vanity. As Mandeville put it, private vices are public benefits. While Rousseau didn't go quite as far as this, he still saw the need for a civil religion. This would contain a minimal religious element while encouraging political and martial virtues. Once again, hindsight enables us to see the seeds of fascism here, a devious leader at the head of a civil religion. Such a situation was fraught with danger. The Social Contract was published in 1762 and met with decidedly mixed reaction. Many saw in it the way to future liberty and a just society. Others were less impressed. The citizens of Geneva had not expected such ingratitude. The authorities, the 25 despots, ordered the book to be burned. Worse than the insult to their city was the wilful misrepresentation of their religion. Here they had a point. Their Calvinism was both genuinely Christian and genuinely patriotic. Geneva had been required to fight for its religious freedom.